This is Inside the Commission, a Gambling Commission podcast. Welcome to Inside the Commission, a podcast all about gambling in Great Britain. Here we'll cover all the latest topics and trends from across the gambling sector and discuss the big issues that matter to you. From consumer queries to industry insights, we'll bring you the facts from the front line of regulation and share the stats and stories from those in the know. For all the latest discussions and updates, you can subscribe to our Gambling Commission YouTube channel, or you can find us on your preferred platform, wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Welcome to the Gambling Commission podcast. So far in this mini-series, we've been looking at our advisory groups, and we've already met with Industry Panel Chair Kirsty Caldwell and the Digital Advisory Panel Chair Christian. And hopefully, if you haven't had a chance to catch up on those discussions, you can visit our YouTube channel and hear all about the work that goes on in those panels. But for this final episode, we're going to focus on our lived experience advisory panel. So it's very important at the Commission here that we value the input and the insight from our lived experience panel. So this is hopefully an opportunity to share a little bit more about the work you guys do and how you input into the Commission, and sort of how that work really drives forward what we do as a regulator. So we're joined here today by two guests from the panel. So let's get into introducing them. Shall we start with you, Sue?
So I've been a part of the panel for 6 years now. For the past 2 years, I have been co-chairing the panel. So for me, what led me into this is obviously my own experience of gambling harm. I started gambling at 25 and I descended, I guess, into addiction. I think I was in active addiction for around 12 years before finally entering recovery. And I think I found a lot of my recovery through social media sites and just sort of joining conversations, and from that, it sort of led me to ask questions about what kind of support was out there for people experiencing gambling harm, and also who advocates for these people, because there seem to be a lot of people seeking help and not really knowing where to go for support with that. So from there, I kind of got involved in the Gambling Commission, got interested in what they did, and what was within and also outside of their remit when it comes to regulation. And I applied to be a part of the Lived Experience Advisory Panel and was successful in my application. From there, that's led to a lot of changes in my life. I was able to take part in some conferences with the Gambling Commission, which was a great opportunity for me, and that led me into my work with Bet No More, where I currently manage the Women's Support Service New Beginnings. So it's been completely transformational for me, really, being a part of this panel and coming to sort of the end, I guess, of my term of 6 years. It's quite saddening, but also quite nice to look back on the changes that we have made and the difference that we've made to people experiencing gambling harms.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing that. That's really insightful. Can I just ask, so when you decided you wanted to give back and take part in sort of that lived experience thing, it's not an easy decision, is it? It's not something that, and maybe a lot of people when they're coming out of addiction might not want to go back into that. So how did you sort of weigh that up?
It isn't an easy decision, and I think in a lot of cases it does feel like you're almost raking up the ashes of your addiction. You almost want to move past it and carry on with your life. But for me, I was 39 at this stage, and I'd been gambling for 12 years. That was a huge formational part of my life. Those years were really important in terms of my psychological, personal and professional development. And it was part of me, and it didn't feel appropriate to just pretend it never happened. I wanted to get something from it and build on it. And yeah, it was difficult in the sense that I knew that I was going to be putting a certain amount of, I was shining a spotlight on something that I'd always kept secret. And in the first year or so of my involvement with the Commission, I continued to keep it secret. I didn't sort of share with people. But the more I got involved and the more I felt that I was learning and the more that I felt that I was respected for my lived experience, that gave me the confidence that I needed to then start to share that with people in my circle and professionally even, and start to say to a point where I was posting on social media, this is what I went through, and a lot of people were surprised to hear it because I'd always kept it so undercover. But my involvement with the Gambling Commission gave me the confidence that I needed to, I guess, come out of the gambling closet. And really I was met with support and, encouragement from people who thought that actually what I'd done was brave, and I always really appreciated that.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really impressive. Thank you so much. And we're also joined by Matt. Matt, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for your introduction as well, Sue. My name's Matt. I've been on the panel a little over 2 years now, and I guess a little bit about me and how I found myself in this position. So now I've started to understand and unpick my past. I recognise that my kind of foundations were set early on in life, with an early introduction to gambling, for the reason that many people do, the social family element. One of my earliest memories would be watching the Grand National, with family and friends, and betting for things like sweets out of a tub of Quality Street or something like that, just a bit of social fun. However, it obviously left a mark somewhere, that early introduction, and I guess it manifested over time up to the age of being in high school and having a little bit more responsibility, a little bit more time away from parents, joining a local snooker hall where there was fruit machines and stuff like that, starting to experiment and push my boundaries a little bit. And then there was a significant change in my life. After school, I decided to join the military, and that took me away. It took me away from people, parents, for example, teachers, other family members that had always kept a kind of a watchful eye on and a certain amount of responsibility. I was a free man, albeit still a child, and with that I was exposed to different things, and had a fantastic career. I loved the job I did. I was in the Royal Navy, and travel was one of the main reasons, and adventure, why I joined, and I was introduced to different formats of gambling, one of which being land-based casinos all over the world. And again, now I look back and reflect, I recognise some of the tactics that we used to kind of potentially prey on the vulnerable to a certain extent. In foreign climates, we'd be met and greeted by casino resorts, and they'd provide transport from the dockyard to the casinos, and you're made to feel quite welcome. Was it an issue? Probably not. I was doing it with other people, with friends, not in isolation, within my means from a monetary perspective. However, again, it was another part of the puzzle. And then something happened in my life relating to my physical health, where I ended up being medically discharged from the forces, and that's something which I classify as a significant event, which led to further things and ultimately the harm associated to gambling. And I didn't want to leave, and I didn't talk about it. I kept these things to myself, and that process of kind of being discharged took 12 months, at which time I was living in isolation, 300 miles away from my long-term partner, and started to lose myself. My mental health deteriorated, and one of the outputs where I found some solace and escapism was again in land-based casinos, albeit in Britain this time, and this kind of behaviour continued for years to come. And I went to work in the offshore oil and gas industry, and then I was introduced to the online world, which opened up another pathway and means to carry on my behaviours without going unnoticed, really. I had a fairly good wage, a large disposable income, and I think many people would deem the financial aspect has been a huge marker of harm. However, that didn't rear its head for me for several years. Time was always the one that was my biggest marker of harm, and eventually, I'd exhausted all avenues of doing things, and I came to a point where I recognised I needed change, and that came shortly before my 30th birthday, and I went on a recovery journey. I started to be true to myself, honest with those around me, started to work on myself and learn different tactics and experiment in different things, and one of them was a change in career, and I found myself similar to Sue in working in the gambling harm support sector, and with that I started to enjoy. Started to find some purpose that I'd lost from my kind of loss of identity from leaving the forces, and I could turn this pain that I'd witnessed into purpose. And I'd been working in the sector for about a year, and then I saw the opportunity to join LEAP with the Gambling Commission, and I was quite inquisitive about it. I didn't really understand what it was and what the objectives were, and I was successful, and I'm so glad I did, because some of the work we've done, which I'm sure we'll touch on as the conversation goes on, has been incredibly meaningful, and and I feel like it's a duty to utilise my voice alongside the likes of Sue to hopefully mitigate harm for those that come next, and future generations, and having a young son myself, that's something I'm really passionate about.
Yeah. I mean, similar sort of question to sort of Sue, like that decision to get back involved in it after everything you've been through and your own journey and the effect it had on you. They're not easy decisions, are they, to decide to give back and work in a field which you're probably thinking, I want to stay as far away from that as possible. It's not.
Yeah, it was interesting. It's several years ago now, and I always say the term, the G word, the G being gambling, something that I can't do my now career without using that word on a daily basis. And I was very conscious, being a married man, I was content in what I wanted to do and the work that I wanted to channel my energy into. However, I was aware of the effect it could have on those that have been affected by my gambling. I'm very fortunate to have a fantastic support network in my wife and close family, and it was my wife that I was really concerned about. Although I'd be happy to do the work I do, what effect was it going to have on her? Something that if at the time you'd asked her about, she would rather forget. She's seen a change in me, and all of a sudden I want to now work, so to say, 9 till 5, Monday to Friday, all around the topic that caused so much harm to our family. And I was right to think that. I reached out to my recovery community and some group work that I do, and I've learned to talk. I've learned to be honest and not hold things to myself and share things. And about 6 weeks into my new career, my wife said, I'm struggling with this. I can't do this. She's quite content with me doing self work stuff on myself, once or twice a week, outside the house. But now that I was working from home remotely, talking about gambling on a daily basis for the right reason, of course it's going to have an effect on her. However, as the years have gone by, she's started to see how it's benefited me, and actually that ripple effect of how it's helping her and my son, and is quite satisfying. And I think it's okay to say that, for those of us that are willing to use our experiences to help shape and support others through the power of lived experience. There's something to be said about it, and I appreciate that it's not for everybody, however, it works for me, and I enjoy it.
Yeah, and the better we are for it, and I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Okay, so let's sort of focus a bit more on the lived experience advisory panel then. So Sue, as you said, you've been on the panel for 6 years as a co-chair, and that term sort of coming to an end, and funnily enough, Matt's the person who's going to be filling those shoes, not just one pair of shoes, but 2 pairs of shoes he's got to fill, as he'll be taking on the role of the chair. So, I mean, from both of your perspectives, obviously for the last 6 years, and what you've been on the panel for 2 years, but now you take on the chair role. Sort of give us an idea about the LEAP panel, who makes up the panel, how you get involved, how you function, how you work.
Yeah, well, I mean, the panel is changed a little bit over recent years. We started with an interim panel, which kind of set all the groundwork, and then the recruitment drive that I was involved in, which built up the wider panel, which has again changed a little bit in recent years. But it's made up, we have a really good mix. So we have people like myself and Matt who work for third sector organisations. So I mean, the main point with LEAP members, because we have the requirement for our own personal safety to be abstinent from gambling for a period of 12 months before joining, we end up in the circumstance whereby our gambling becomes sort of historic. So Matt and I work for third sector organisations, so we support people day to day who experience gambling harm, and that kind of gives us a connection, if you like, to the problems that are still, they're still affecting people today, even though our gambling was more in the past. I mean, yeah, so like I said, the panel's made up of a mix of people. So there's people like us who work for third sector, and there are people who just have regular day-to-day jobs, who've had their own experience of gambling harm, and they just applied because they want to be able to contribute, they want to be able to help and ensure that people don't experience the same harms that they did. I just want to point out as well, I haven't been chair for 6 years. I've been a member for 6 years, and only been co-chair for the past 2 years. Okay. But yeah, we have a really good mix in the panel, and hope to continue that moving forward. And obviously Matt passing on the torch to Matt now, but you're quite well established, I would say. Do you feel confident?
Yeah, I am fairly confident, and I'm pleased to be able to lead the team, so to say, and be the bridge between the panel and the commission, and really get our teeth into some new work and make sure we're being utilised for the right reason. I've got big shoes to fill. I'm grateful for the work that Sue and Leon, our other current co-chair, have done, and likewise the chairs that came before them, to really establish LEAP for what it is now, and it's only growing. And I'm happy to take the lead with that and see how we can continue to make some impact, to the future.
Yeah, I mean, significant contributions that we've made so far. I think the earlier panel, which I was involved in, made a significant contribution to the white paper for the Gambling Act review. And that was probably one of our most valuable contributions to date. And more recently, we've been involved in discussions about research projects that have been taking place, and we are really quite well utilised now by the Commission in terms of feeding back on surveys, on policy change, on things like the unlicensed market, where there's a lot of work happening at the moment with the Commission, but LEAP is consistently now consulted on these issues, which is good, and it's quite a development.
Yeah, no, that's really impressive. So, are there particular bits that you think you want to focus on as a panel, or where it goes next, that you think would be quite interesting to share with the audience?
Yeah, I mean, there've been some issues that have been ongoing that we raised sort of in previous years, and we are still sort of pushing for those aims to move forward. Should I list the examples? Or?
Yeah, if you've got some.
Yeah, so just, we've been asking sort of for further protections around land-based gaming, for example, single customer view, account-based play, just to make sure that we are taking the onus away from the person who's experiencing gambling harms, because really we feel that once that person has identified themselves as experiencing gambling harms, it should no longer really be on them to make sure that they are steering clear of these products. There should be some kind of expectation from industry that they are committed to the exclusion policies that they offer. So yeah, we're moving those things forward as well. We had a discussion about that today. I don't know if I'm going to pass over to Matt for some more.
Yeah, it's a topic of conversation and something that's not going to go away easily, and that is the unlicensed and illegal gambling market. It's a big beast. We have been utilised several times over the last year around this topic of conversation. It's something that doesn't necessarily relate to me directly. I never was one of those consumers, and I know Sue spoke earlier about I'm maybe a little bit outdated with that regard. I still can understand the thoughts, feelings, emotions associated with the adverse effects of certain activities, but as a consumer, I'm a bit out of date. and I'd like to see that consumer come forward really to help shape. I don't know how we do it. I wish I had a magic wand, but we're talking about something that's on a global scale here. Out that maybe sits outside of the UK, but is impacting residents of the UK. And I don't think the work can be done, by one organisation. I think we've got to get multiple voices and multiple representatives around the table to really work hard on how we address it in the correct way, with the input of lived experience, to not drive away the consumer of the regulated market by having too many restrictions, because it's a difficult conversation, but there becomes a limit where a licensed market can put too many restrictions on a customer that then forces them away for an easier experience, a more enjoyable play, a more enjoyable experience of partaking in an activity, certainly in the online world. So you've got to tread carefully. We're all aware it's an issue. How we tackle it, I don't know, but I think there's a movement and there's some forward momentum, and we just need to find the right people to say the right things to help shape the future. I'm aware it's not going to happen overnight, but that's something that I will hopefully be able to input on going forward in my new tenure.
I mean, one of the areas is obviously as the panel evolves, people come and join, and new people, will join the panel in the future, and obviously the industry's moving on and the challenges are changing. Like you said, you've got to keep up with the type of consumption that's happening in this space. How would you sort of, not pitch the panel, but how would you sort of show the importance of why this is, for someone to come and be a part of this and to give back, and the role that will play? Because obviously for you guys, you made that decision when you got to that point, you wanted to give back, and this was a great opportunity. So how would you sort of, if you were explaining that to someone who was thinking, oh, well, I've got this experience or this knowledge, I could potentially share some of this or shine a light on this for others to use, how would you explain that?
I think possibly it would be a good idea for us to provide examples of ways in which we have been able to influence change, because I think that's the main thing that gets people involved, is that they get to a point where they feel relatively stable in their own recovery, and they think, okay, well, what now? And in my case, I almost got a little bit angry with the industry, and I almost started to feel like, okay, well, was I adequately protected? Were my needs listened to? Was I vulnerable? Was I identified as such? And I think by giving examples of ways in which we have been listened to and we have been respected in our lived experience, it's almost seen us be treated as we are treated as colleagues now by the Commission. It's not sort of a tokenistic tick box panel that they just need to stamp and sign and say, yes, we've consulted lived experience. We feel listened to, and I think the more examples we could give of that, the more we're potentially going to bring people forward to share their own lived experience when they know that it's going to have impact.
Yeah, well put, Sue, and I would just add that with a different direction of recovery and joining something like LEAP, there may naturally be feelings of apprehension, and I certainly felt those myself, but what I can certainly vouch for is the safety, the protection, the safeguarding of us as panel members, and the work we do is always a priority for the Commission. They put our well-being first and make sure we're comfortable in doing what we do. If I showed any sign of not wanting to do this podcast, for example, it wouldn't be forced upon me. My decisions are respected, and that goes across the board. We're well led by our lived experience manager, Kelly, who does regular check-ins and makes sure that we're okay in the work we're doing, and is very consciously aware of potential adverse impacts that doing this kind of work can lead to, certainly if you're in recovery from the adverse effects of.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. Thank you so much. I just want to sort of touch on the role of LEAP and how it's sort of perceived in the wider industry, in the gambling industry, and and there could be perceptions that you're sort of here to stop gambling or try and vilify it in some sort of way, where actually you're trying to give back and reduce harm.
Yeah.
So what's your views on that sort of opinion, how the LEAP operates and how you try and manage that dynamic, I suppose.
I think in certain conversations that expectation is evident when you enter the room, and that there's almost a certain auto defensiveness that you can feel that, like you can sense that, certainly from interactions that we've had with the industry forum, for example. But that's something that I even said in my interview for Leap, is that I am not on a crusade, and I don't think there's any member of the panel now that would consider themselves any kind of prohibitionist when it comes to gambling. And I think we share the aims of the Gambling Commission when we just say we want to make it fair, we want to make it safe, we want to make sure that, obviously we know we're not going to ban gambling, that's unrealistic, and it's never been the intention. I think in certain circumstances, certainly the beginning of the panel, there was a lot of apprehension from certain groups when it came to speaking with Leap, because they had anticipated that there would be some form of attack, that we would be disgruntled, we would be angry, we would be at odds with the industry because of our own experiences. But in reality, we've had enough time and distance away from those experiences, and we understand that we need to collaborate. Otherwise, that there's no way of actually moving forward if we're just at loggerheads. So it's been actually. It's taken time to progress from those first impressions, but I think the more we interact, the more people think, okay, well, this is reasonable, this is okay, this is a conversation, it's not an attack, and it's not us versus them, most definitely.
Yeah, I was asked a similar question some 2 years ago at the annual spring conference by Tim Miller. I was sat on a panel alongside industry members, and I think Tim asked me, was the effect of what would you like to see change over the coming years, and I said something along the lines of, there's lots of voices represented, albeit possibly people working in silos, and to reiterate what Sue said there, my request was, I think we should get us all around the table, and lo and behold, 18 months later, we were around the table, with industry representatives through the panel of the industry forum and us as LEAP members, and things have to start somewhere, don't they? I'll reiterate what Sue said. I'm not anti-gambling. I've got to work with it. It's there. It's been there a long time. It's not going to go away. However, we could potentially make things slightly safer, mitigate harm going forward for future people, i.e. young people. And to do so, you've got to work collaboratively in a mature way. Now, the forum, the industry forum, they work in the industry. Sue and I and our other colleagues on the LEAP panel, our gambling harm, is our qualification to be sat around the table, and our experiences. However, it's worth knowing it doesn't define us. We're all educated, we all have different careers and pathways, and we've got a lot to give. And trying to make that visible, and for them to say, the gambling harms and the work we do with LEAP is just a part of our lives. We've all come from different backgrounds, different groups, different careers, and we have a lot to give. So working collaboratively, I think the wheels are in motion, and hopefully the momentum picks up, and we can continue to work collaboratively. We've done something very recently in the last couple of months. Remotely with the industry forum, and it's working.
Okay, well, long may that continue. Thank you so much. Sort of moving on, thinking about gambling, the Gambling Commission and gambling regulations specifically, and sort of what would be the sort of consequences of not having that sort of lived experience voice in the room. And there probably would have been a time when maybe the LEAP panel didn't exist, and we've discussed a lot of the advantages. I suppose what would be the big issue if it disappeared one day?
Yeah, for me, I think that then policies designed to protect people like us who have lived experience would become academic, and whilst I feel there's a place for that, I just don't think there's a substitute for hearing someone's experience. Okay, so this is how this impacted me, and we've been met. Even today, we've had a meeting where we've heard audible gasps, where we've described an experience, and these are from people who are working within the Gambling Commission, and to be able to still surprise people with experiences that we've had, I think really goes to illustrate that point of how important lived experience is, because we just wouldn't be aware unless you've got somebody literally on the front line. If you're not involved, then you can't really understand how these practices, well, what practices that are still going on for one thing, and how they are impacting people who are experiencing harm. People who do not have this addiction, like they don't, it seems so irrational, and it does to me too. I was like, when I was first trapped, I was like, how on earth am I still doing this? It makes no sense. It's having disastrous consequences. Why don't I just stop? And this is what people can't understand outside of it, and when you're inside of it, it's hard enough, believe me. And I think that's really why being able to be open, honest and raw about our own experiences really helps embed the importance in the minds of those people who are working on these policies. And I think that would be what was lacking, really.
Yeah, I think, just some of the, to put traction to some of the research that's been carried out, and namely the Gambling Survey of Great Britain. All the participants that take part in that are anonymised, and lived experience allows that to become a reality. Some of the statements, some of the outcomes of this type of research, it resonates with us, and we're able to talk about it in a forum with staff that maybe run that project, to really bring reality to it. And lived experience, it can't be replicated through statistics and research alone, so for those of us on the panel, we're able to just add that context, and I think that is that shift that's happened over the last 6 years or so, that things are starting to be looked at differently. Maybe the term of people taking their blinkers off, thinking about different harms, the wider determinants of gambling harm, and looking at it as a public health issue, as opposed to a personal choice and a personal outcome. And I think that's, I keep going back to the word movement, it's happening, and we welcome it, and hopefully we can continue to build on that.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful, thank you. Moving on to, I think you discussed some of those things already, but your highlights then, I suppose. You've been with LEAP a while, you've touched on some of the teams that you've worked with and how important your input has been on so many different projects and themes, but so obviously in 6 years, are there moments that you think, oh, we're so glad we did that, that was really insightful conversations, or really happy to be part of that discussion? You mentioned GAR, and yourself, similar for you, Matt, like, in the last couple of years, you've come along to conferences, you've been on panels, you've had the opportunity to speak, go to be chair. Are there moments that sort of stand out to you over the last few years?
Yeah, and they're the less sort of what you would view as being the less important moments. Obviously, we've contributed to review, that's a great achievement. I got a seat at the Secretary of State meeting, the round table, which was great. Again, great achievement. And these are really the things that on paper would be, the highlights. But for me, the personal highlights have just been to have the responses of commission staff, of industry professionals, and just to know that I'm being listened to, and to see that somebody has taken what I've said and understood. And like when we've been part of the conferences, the first one I took part in, I think I was the first lived experience member to do that, and I was on a panel discussion, and it wasn't, the highlight itself wasn't the participation in the discussion itself, it was the response that had. It was the people who reached out to me. It was the people who said thank you for doing that, and said how much it helped them to understand. And I think for me that's been the real highlight, is the feedback that we've had from people who have genuinely appreciated the perspective that LEAP can share.
Yeah, similar really. The inquisitive nature of people that maybe are humble enough to say they don't understand, and to have a conversation with somebody that's willing, like myself, to provide more context to things, to help broaden the thought process and forward thinking into how we can change. And we've seen it this morning, working with some of the senior exec staff, and those audible gasps that Sue mentioned, and the conversations that happened after it at lunch, what can we do about this? I can't believe this is happening. The inquisitive nature of something, a topic that historically, and again it's changing, has been a taboo subject. You know, don't want to talk about the adverse effects, because and that's why the shame and the stigma is so strong with gambling harm. But for people in professional roles, with curiosity, you know, giving people the permission to be curious, I think that the LEAP panel are very good at that, and that's something I'm proud of. And if anybody has a question, I say to them, ask it. I'm not going to be offended. I'm here in this format. Ask a question, you know. So giving people that permission.
No, that sounds really good. I mean, one of the questions we've been asking some of the other panels is around sort of the challenges that the industry is now going to be going through with some of the changes that are coming to, you know, taxation. We had the budget, and there's all sorts of, you know, the landscape is changing with the black market, and there's lots of new sort of things coming up over the horizon, which are quite meaty areas. How is the sort of LEAP panel going to be sort of meeting some of those challenges or inputting into some of those things? And, you know, they're quite significant moments, I suppose. And I suppose the world is always changing at some point, and gambling was always changing. It's not a new thing as well, but it feels like there's a bit different this time.
At the risk of sounding negative around gambling, it's almost like a virus. It mutates to get around, you know, the measures that are put in place. And the unlicensed market is an example of that. And not just that, we've talked about this today, and one thing that is particularly important to me is the emergence of gambling adjacent products. And what I mean by that is the Facebook raffles, the lotteries, the things that just pop up and are very difficult to police, you know, and also gaming, and like these games that people have on their tablets and such like. Now, we've had people access our services who've never formally placed a bet, but what they have done is purchase coins to continue playing on false casino sites, because they use the same mechanisms that gambling sites use, which is time restrictive, buy it now, get a bonus, and it always pops up as you run out of coins. Do you know what? If you buy it in the next 5, 4, 3, then you're going to get 300. And I've seen people, you know, spend money. They know they're not going to get any money back. So technically that's not gambling. However, it's still working on that same dopamine reward system, and it's still highly problematic for people who can get really trapped in those cycles. Obviously, it's currently sat outside of the remit, but it's something that is growing, and it's at some stage going to need to be addressed. I'll let Matt pick up from there.
Rapid developments, you know, other things that sit alongside what Sue spoke about, AI, you know, the crypto market. How big do we allow something to get before it becomes deemed to be a problem, and therefore it becomes regulated? That's what I worry about, you know. We've seen it happen in the past, and we've got to keep pace with these evolving climates. How do we do it? In the first instance, we carry on talking about it. You know, we spark the conversation. We give our insight as people with lived experience, and be a voice not just for us as individuals in the panel, but, you know, the wider communities out there in society that are currently witnessing these things. And we've just got to keep going with it. You know, trying to stay one step ahead of the trend is difficult in today's technologically advanced world, but we've got to keep doing it. You know, we can't turn a blind eye to it, because it could go boom, and then we've got an even bigger problem. So we need to align ourselves with it, think of opportunities and ways that we can address it, potentially regulate it, get the listening ear of government to really understand it for what it is, and lived experience can input on that. You know, we can make this real. And talk about it to instrument change, and hopefully it can be plateaued somewhat, you know, and be kept under control for the safety of the consumer.
That's absolutely fine. So I suppose that brings me to the end of the questions, really. Was there anything else that you thought you wanted to share on in terms of the elite panel? Then, of course, Sue, you'll be finishing. When do you actually finish?
Well, I mean, it keeps pushing back. It's currently December. Obviously, I've really enjoyed my involvement. I'll be very sad to see it finish. And I just, for me, one of the main priorities is to make sure that there is adequate female representation on the elite panel, because that's something that I've worked with quite a lot, is that women have a different experience of gambling harm slightly to men, and it can be a little bit more difficult for women to come forward and look for help, because gambling is still kind of viewed as being a male pursuit, and there's an additional stigma and shame attached to women. So hopefully we will continue to see women standing up and speaking up about their experience of gambling harms to sort of pave the way for others to do the same.
Yeah, I'd like to see Leap continue. You know, I say I'm 2.5 years in, so potentially if I align myself with Sue, I've got another 3 and a bit years left, potentially, in which time we hope to welcome new panel members. I would like to see the younger voice represented, female and male, maybe the voice of more affected others, those affected by somebody else's gambling. And specifically, although it's important having spouses and immediate loved ones, I'd like to see adult children represented, that have grown up in an area through their childhood, have maybe witnessed other harms like compromised parenting and such forth, to be able to input into some of the work and really bring more evidence to some of the research that's been carried out.
No, that sounds like a really good shout. Okay, well, thank you so much for coming along. I'm sure we'll catch up again in the future around the elite panel, and I'm sure we'll hear about Sue's plans later on when she decides what she's going to do next. But thank you so much.
Thank you for having us. Appreciate it.
This is Inside the Commission, a Gambling Commission podcast. To stay up to date with the latest content, you can subscribe to our Gambling Commission YouTube channel, or you can find us on your preferred platform, wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks for listening.